There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in the world, and we're going to talk about it. Before I do that, I just got my first copy of Death of Civilization by Chuck Holton. You should get it. It's a book that will help you prepare for what we will likely see over the next 4 years as the Democrats try to derail the Trump administration by encouraging violence and craziness and shenanigans all across the country and what you can do to be prepared for it. I'm going to give away in the next couple days 10 copies of this, and we're selling 100 signed copies. The proceeds will go to support those girls down in Colombia that we take care of. Okay, you may have heard about the uh, fighting in Syria that's kicked off. And I'm going to explain how that relates to what's happening in Israel and elsewhere. Uh, Let me just see if I can make this as simple as possible. There are 3 or 4 different teams fighting over Syria right now and have been for years. Syria has been in a civil war for more than 10 years, and it has resulted in one of the largest flows of migrants out of the country and in the world today. More than 7 million people have fled Syria. It is a playground for other powers who are trying to assert their power in that region. So you have these 4 different teams. It's really kind of 3 actually, but we'll talk about that. The first team is the team that's supported by the Americans, and that's the Kurds. So the Kurds control about a third, the eastern third of Syria, and they call it Rojava. Rojava is what they hope to make into the nation of Kurdistan, along with the northern part of Iraq. The United States has been supporting the Kurds all the way back to the war in Iraq. We supported the Kurds when they were fighting against ISIS. The Kurds lost a lot of men, about 12,000 men in the fight against ISIS over several years from 2014 to 18, 19. And it's actually still going on. ISIS never actually went away. They just changed their names and their uniforms. So that brings us to the second team that's fighting over Syria, and that is Turkey, which is using the Free Syrian Army, the FSA. Now, the Free Syrian Army is a conglomeration of, we call it the United Nations of ISIS. They are Sunni fighters that used to be Al Qaeda, used to be ISIS, and several other extremist groups. The Obama administration started the Free Syrian Army when we got out of the fight in Iraq. And this, you're going all the way back to basically like 2009. And the Obama administration spent over $1 billion arming, training, and funding through the CIA the Free Syrian Army. It was meant to be a group that would fight against the Syrian army, which is controlled by Bashar al Assad and the Syrian government. And so let me explain that team next. The Syrian army is the actual army of Syria, controlled by the president of Syria, Bashar al Assad. He's a dictator, but he is not Sunni, he is Alawite. But they are cozy with the Shiites. So, for the purposes of this conflict, just think of them as Shiites. Turkey supports ISIS. ISIS is Sunni, and Sunni and Shiites don't play well together. There's one more player supporting the Syrian government, and that's Russia. Russia and the Syrian government have one side of the Shiites. Turkey and ISIS, or the Free Syrian Army, they're fighting on the side of the Sunnis. And Turkey is like straight up Muslim Brotherhood at this point. The United States is now supporting the Kurds, The Kurds are Sunni or Yazidi, and there's even a few Christians in there. Then you have the other team that's trying to assert its power in Syria, which is the Iranians, and they're supporting the Hashishabi or the Iranian backed militias that are there. And the people that Iran is supporting in Syria are some Hezbollah, some Hamas that are fighting there. It is absolutely crazy. It is like a goat rodeo in Syria every single day. And everybody is basically fighting each other. Now, take a look at this map. The yellow part is controlled by the Kurds. The teal part up in the north is controlled by the Turks and the Free Syrian Army. The red part is controlled by the Syrian government, backed by Russia. The ones who are really doing the fighting right now are other factions that are rebel factions trying to overthrow the Syrian government, supported by the Free Syrian Army. But this is the mistake that everybody's making with Syria, that I see at least on social media. I've been watching Twitter today, and there's a ton of people that rightly believe that the Syrian government under Bashar al Assad is evil and needs to be overthrown. That much we can agree on. However, they're acting like the rebels who are fighting the Syrian army are, they're the good guy team. Well, no, they're not the good guy team. These are bad guys that are being fought by even worse guys. The Syrian government, bad guys, definitely. The guys who are taking them over, who are at least right now having some success at pushing out the Syrian government from positions in Idlib and Aleppo, those guys are even worse. They are supported by the remnants of ISIS. Many of the fighters once called themselves ISIS. If they were to take over the entire country, they would massacre the Kurds and institute basically an ISIS caliphate again in Syria. So it's not necessarily worth getting excited about the fact that these guys are winning at the moment, at least in Aleppo, against the Syrian government. If you look over here in the middle of Rojava, in the yellow section, there's a red dot. That red dot is Hasaka. In Hasaka, there is a small contingent of Syrian troops who have been devastating the people in Al-Hasaka. Al-Hasaka is a crossroads and an important place in Rojava. The Syrians have been cutting off the water supply to tens of thousands of people in Al-Hasaka for a couple of years now. Whenever they get mad at uh, the Kurds, they just cut the water off and people don't have any water. They also have checkpoints up in Kamishli, up here in the north, which you can see there. I've been to these places many times. Kamishli and Al Hasaka are both places near camps where they're holding the remnants of ISIS and their families. They've got more than 10,000 ISIS fighters and families in these camps. They don't know what to do with them because they can't just wholesale murder them. They can't send them to any other country because what country would want some ISIS fighters and their families? They don't want to let them go, although they escape from time to time. The Kurds keep them in these camps. These camps are hotbeds for radicalism and terrorist activities and stuff. And it's just a really bad setup, not a good system. The United States is supporting the Kurds in keeping a lid on these ISIS guys. And we also have U.S. troops down here in Deir ez-Zor. The history of Deir ez-Zor is very sad. Deir ez-Zor is right on the Euphrates River. The border between the yellow area and the red area here is the Euphrates River. this area has seen so much death for more than a century. Deir ez-Zor is the place where the Armenians were death marched to during the 1918 Armenian genocide. And that went on until 1922 or even further than that. There's another river valley right up here called the Kaba River Valley. That's the valley where they marched the Armenians during the genocide. Their idea was to march them from Armenia, which is now eastern Turkey, the area around Van, and march them south into the desert until they were all dead, because these are all women and children, and they just wanted to get rid of them, and they didn't want the political outcry of just lining them up and machine gunning them all. And besides, they didn't have that many bullets. They did basically do that to all the men. And then the women and children, they just marched them south and figured they'd just march them until they all expired. They wouldn't die. And so they marched them 900 miles into the desert, all the way down to Deir ez-Zor. Along the way, people would escape or they would get taken in by Arabs or Kurds who would make some of the women into members of their harem. They would make them into concubines. Sex slaves was what we'd call them today. And I've actually met some of those women on my trips to Syria. You can tell because they get tattoos. They were tattooed on their faces. They had tattoo markings on their faces that denoted ownership and told what family they belonged to. I have pictures of those women. It's incredibly sad. Along that Kaba River Valley, going down to Deir ez-Zor, where it meets the Euphrates, there are to this day some Armenian villages. The Armenians that live there are forming militias to defend themselves against the Turks up in the north and the remnants of ISIS. But I repeat myself because those two are one and the same. So I know this is pretty convoluted and crazy, but I wanted to give you some background on what's going on here.